Good evening, dear friends. As the day settles into quiet stillness, we invite you to join us on a peaceful journey through time, to places where knowledge has always found its most sacred home. Tonight, we'll wander together through the hallowed halls of history's greatest libraries, those magnificent sanctuaries where countless minds have sought wisdom, where scribes worked by flickering candlelight, and where the world's most precious thoughts were carefully preserved between covers of leather and papyrus. These are the places where knowledge truly sleeps, not in the sense of dormancy, but in the gentle rest that comes from being safely kept, lovingly tended, and patiently waiting for the next curious soul to discover its treasures. So settle in comfortably, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift with us into the serene world of ancient libraries, where time moves differently, and every whispered page holds the dreams of those who came before us. Chapter 1. The Library of Alexandria. Our journey begins in the ancient city of Alexandria, where the Mediterranean Sea meets the fertile Nile Delta. Here, over 2,000 years ago, stood perhaps the most legendary library the world has ever known. Picture, if you will, the great Library of Alexandria in its prime. The year is 280 BCE, and the morning sun casts long shadows across marble columns that reach toward the heavens. The air is filled with the gentle rustle of papyrus scrolls and the soft murmur of scholars from across the known world. The library was not merely a collection of books. It was a living organism, breathing with the accumulated wisdom of civilizations. Founded by Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, it was designed to house all human knowledge under one roof. Can you imagine such an ambitious dream? Every ship that entered Alexandria's harbor was searched, not for contraband, but for books. Any scroll found was copied by the library's scribes, and sometimes, the original was kept, and the copy returned to its owner. The library's scribes worked in peaceful silence, their reed pens scratching softly against papyrus. These dedicated souls would spend their entire lives copying texts, preserving the thoughts of Aristotle, the mathematics of Euclid, the poetry of Sappho. Each stroke of their pens was an act of devotion to knowledge itself. In the library's reading rooms, scholars would gather around low tables, their voices barely above a whisper as they debated philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. The great Eratosthenes walked these halls, calculating the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy. Archimedes may have pondered his mathematical principles here, while physicians studied the human body through careful observation and gentle inquiry. The library was said to contain over 700,000 scrolls. Imagine the weight of all that knowledge, the countless hours of human thought and discovery, all resting peacefully in organized sections. There were scrolls on astronomy that mapped the stars, medical texts that described healing herbs, and poetry that captured the deepest longings of the human heart. As evening would fall over Alexandria, oil lamps would be lit throughout the library. The soft, golden glow would illuminate the faces of scholars who had traveled from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond, all united in their quiet pursuit of understanding. The library was a place where knowledge transcended borders, where ideas flowed as freely as the Nile itself. Though the great library eventually faded into history, its spirit lives on. In every library that opens its doors to seekers of wisdom, in every scholar who dedicates their life to preserving knowledge, and in every quiet moment when we open a book and connect with minds from across the centuries. Chapter 2. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Our journey now carries us eastward, along the ancient Silk Road, to the magnificent city of Baghdad in the 9th century. Here, in the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, stood another beacon of learning, the House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah. Picture the year 830 CE. The Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun has just established this remarkable institution, and the warm desert air carries the scent of ink and parchment through corridors lined with countless manuscripts. The House of Wisdom was more than a library. It was a translation center, an academy, and a place where the world's knowledge was carefully gathered and preserved. Here, in rooms cooled by gentle breezes from the Tigris River, scholars worked with quiet dedication to translate the great works of Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian astronomy into Arabic. These weren't mere copies. They were loving translations that preserved not just words, but the very essence of human thought across cultures and languages. The great Al-Khwarizmi sat at his desk here, developing the foundations of algebra. His name would eventually give us the word algorithm. Nearby, other scholars worked on astronomical texts, their calculations helping to map the heavens with unprecedented precision. The The soft scratch of reed pens on paper created a gentle symphony of learning. One of the most beautiful aspects of the House of Wisdom was its inclusivity. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars worked side by side, united in their pursuit of knowledge. They understood that wisdom knows no religious or cultural boundaries, that truth, like water, finds its own level regardless of the vessel that contains it. The translators here performed work that was almost sacred in its importance. They would take a Greek text on medicine, perhaps the works of Galen, and render it into Arabic with such care that future generations could build upon ancient knowledge. They were like bridges spanning centuries, connecting the wisdom of the past with the discoveries of the future. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the call to prayer echoed softly across Baghdad, scholars would gather in the library's peaceful reading rooms. By the light of oil lamps, they would compare different versions of texts, debate translations, and slowly, carefully, piece together the great puzzle of human understanding. The House of Wisdom also served as a center for original research. Scholars here made groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics, developed new medical treatments, and created astronomical instruments of remarkable precision. Yet all of this was done with a sense of humble service to knowledge itself. As we imagine these dedicated souls working late into the night, we can almost hear the gentle turning of pages, the soft murmur of discussion, and the peaceful scratch of pens preserving wisdom for future generations. The House of Wisdom reminds us that knowledge is a gift that grows when shared, and that the greatest libraries are those that serve not just their own time, but all of humanity's future. Chapter 3. The Monastery Libraries of Medieval Europe. Our path now winds through the mist-covered hills of medieval Europe, where knowledge found refuge in the quiet sanctuaries of monastery libraries. These were the places where learning survived the tumultuous centuries following the fall of Rome, preserved by monks who saw the copying of manuscripts as a form of prayer. Picture a monastery library in 12th century Ireland. The year is 1150, and morning light filters through small windows, casting a golden glow across rows of wooden shelves. Here, in the Abbey of Kells, monks have spent generations creating some of the most beautiful books the world has ever seen. The scriptorium was the heart of the monastery's scholarly life. In this quiet room, monks would sit at individual desks, each equipped with quills, inks, and parchment. The work was slow, meditative, and profound. A single page might take an entire day to complete, with every letter formed as an act of devotion. Brother Columba dips his quill in midnight blue ink, carefully forming the letters of a psalm. His work is illuminated with intricate Celtic knots, golden spirals, and tiny creatures that seem to dance across the page. This is the famous Book of Kells taking shape, stroke by patient stroke. The monastery libraries were more than repositories of religious texts. They preserved classical literature, scientific treatises, and historical chronicles that might otherwise have been lost forever. These monks understood that knowledge, like faith, required constant tending and care. In the library of the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, shelves lined with oak and walnut held manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, and music theory alongside theological works. The monks here developed one of the earliest systems of musical notation, their gentle chants helping to preserve the mathematical relationships that govern harmony and melody. The daily rhythm of monastery life created the perfect environment for scholarly work. After morning prayers, the scriptorium would fill with the soft sound of quills on parchment. During the long afternoon hours, monks would read aloud to one another, sharing the wisdom of ancient texts in voices that barely rose above a whisper. The production of a single manuscript could take months or even years. The parchment had to be prepared from sheepskin, carefully cleaned and stretched. Inks were mixed from natural pigments, blues from lapis lazuli, reds from cinnabar, and gold from precious metals. Each book was literally worth its weight in gold. In the monastery library of Monte Cassino in Italy, founded by Saint Benedict himself, monks preserved the works of Aristotle, Plato, and Cicero alongside Christian texts. They understood that all knowledge ultimately led to a greater understanding of the divine, and that preserving human wisdom was itself a holy act. As evening fell, the monastery libraries would grow quiet. Oil lamps would flicker softly, illuminating the peaceful faces of monks reading by their light. The silence was not empty, but full, pregnant with the accumulated wisdom of centuries, waiting patiently for the next day's work of preservation and discovery. These monastery libraries remind us that knowledge thrives in environments of peace, patience, and reverence, where the work of learning is seen not as a burden, but as a privilege and a joy. Chapter 4. The Imperial Library of Constantinople. Our journey now takes us to the magnificent city of Constantinople, where east meets west at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Here, in the capital of the Byzantine Empire, stood the Imperial Library, a treasure house that preserved the literary heritage of the ancient world for over 1,000 years. Imagine the year 1025 CE. Emperor Basil II has just expanded the Imperial Library, and morning light streams through windows overlooking the Bosphorus. The library occupies several floors of the Great Palace, its halls lined with countless codices, the bound books that had largely replaced the ancient scrolls. The Imperial Library was remarkable for its systematic organization. Manuscripts were carefully catalogued by subject, author, and date. There were sections for theology, philosophy, history, medicine, and literature. The librarians here were scholars themselves, many of them former professors from the University of Constantinople. In the philosophy section, you might find the only surviving copy of Aristotle's treatise on comedy, resting peacefully beside the complete works of Plato. The poetry section held the full collection of Sappho's verses, while the history section preserved chronicles that spanned from the founding of Rome to the present day. The library's scholars worked with a deep sense of responsibility. They knew they were the custodians of civilization's memory. When ancient papyrus scrolls became too fragile to handle, they would carefully transfer their contents to more durable parchment. This painstaking work often took years, but it ensured that knowledge would survive for future generations. The process of copying was almost ritualistic. Scribes would begin each day with a prayer, asking for steady hands and clear minds. They worked in silence, their pens moving with practiced grace across the page. When copying poetry, they would sometimes murmur the verses softly, letting the rhythm of the words guide their writing. One of the most touching aspects of the Imperial Library was its role in preserving Greek literature. When the Western Roman Empire fell, many classical texts were lost in the chaos. But here in Constantinople, scholars continued to copy and preserve these works, understanding that they were keeping alive the voice of an entire civilization. The library's reading rooms were places of quiet contemplation. Scholars from across the empire would come to study here, their voices barely above a whisper as they discussed the finer points of Homeric poetry or Platonic philosophy. The afternoon light would slant through tall windows, illuminating manuscripts that had been copied and recopied for generations. The Imperial Library also served as a center for new scholarship. Historians like Anna Komnenos wrote their chronicles here, while theologians debated the subtle points of doctrine. The library provided not just books, but the peaceful environment necessary for deep thought and careful study. In the evening hours, when the library grew quiet, you might find a lone scholar still at work by lamplight. Perhaps it was Michael Sellos, the great polymath, working on his encyclopedia of knowledge, or perhaps it was Photios, the patriarch and scholar, adding to his vast collection of book reviews and summaries. The Imperial Library reminds us that knowledge is a treasure that must be actively protected. These Byzantine scholars understood that libraries are not just collections of books, but guardians of human memory, preserving the thoughts and dreams of countless generations for those yet to come. Chapter 5. The Great Libraries of China. Our final destination takes us to the ancient libraries of China, where knowledge was preserved on silk and bamboo, and where the art of papermaking would eventually revolutionize the preservation of human thought. In the year 124 BCE, Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty established the Imperial Library in Chang'an. Here, in halls decorated with jade and silk, scholars worked to preserve the classical texts that formed the foundation of Chinese civilization. The library held the 5 classics, the ancient texts that contained the wisdom of Confucius and the early sages. The Chinese approach to libraries was unique. Knowledge was seen as a living thing that required constant cultivation. Scholars didn't just copy texts, they studied them, commented on them, and passed them on to students who would continue the tradition. The library was like a garden where wisdom was carefully tended and allowed to grow. In the Tang Dynasty, the Imperial Library in Chang'an became the largest in the world. It held over 200,000 scrolls and books, including works on astronomy, medicine, poetry, and philosophy. The library's scholars worked with brushes and ink, their elegant calligraphy transforming simple words into works of art. The process of copying Chinese texts was almost meditative. Scholars would grind their own ink, mixing water with ink stones in perfect proportions. They would hold their brushes with 3 fingers, letting the ink flow naturally onto silk or later paper. Each character was formed with care, balancing meaning and beauty in perfect harmony. The library's reading rooms were designed to inspire contemplation. Gardens with lotus ponds and bamboo groves surrounded the buildings, their gentle sounds providing a peaceful backdrop for study. Scholars would often pause in their reading to gaze out at the mountains, finding inspiration in the natural world. One of the most beautiful traditions of Chinese libraries was the practice of book mountains. Scholars would arrange their texts in small stacks, creating landscapes of knowledge that mirrored the natural mountains they so revered. These arrangements were both practical and poetic, reflecting the Chinese understanding that wisdom, like nature, follows its own organic patterns. The invention of paper in China revolutionized the preservation of knowledge. Suddenly, books became more affordable and accessible. The great libraries of China began to fill with works by poets like Li Bai and Du Fu, whose verses captured the beauty of the natural world and the depths of human emotion. As we imagine these ancient Chinese libraries, we can picture scholars in flowing robes, working quietly by windows that overlook misty mountains. Their brushes move with fluid grace, preserving not just words, but the very essence of Chinese culture and wisdom. The great libraries of China remind us that knowledge is not separate from beauty, that the preservation of wisdom can itself be an art form, and that the deepest truths often come to us in moments of quiet contemplation. And so our journey through the ancient libraries comes to a peaceful close. We have wandered together through the great halls of Alexandria, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the quiet scriptoriums of medieval monasteries, the imperial collections of Constantinople, and the elegant libraries of ancient China. What connects all these places is not just their books or their scholars, but their shared reverence for knowledge itself. These were places where learning was seen as sacred, where the preservation of wisdom was understood as one of humanity's highest callings. In each library, we found the same gentle rhythm, the soft scratch of pens on parchment, the quiet whisper of turning pages, the patient work of minds dedicated to preserving truth for future generations. These scholars understood that knowledge is not meant to be hoarded, but shared, not meant to be rushed, but savored, not meant to be forgotten, but lovingly preserved. As you prepare for sleep tonight, carry with you the peaceful spirit of these ancient libraries. Let yourself rest in the knowledge that human wisdom has been carefully preserved across the centuries, waiting patiently for each new generation to discover its treasures. In your dreams, perhaps you'll find yourself walking through moonlit halls lined with ancient books. Perhaps you'll sit with the scholars of Alexandria, watching the Mediterranean sunset through marble columns. Or perhaps you'll join the monks in their quiet scriptoriums, adding your own gentle voice to the eternal conversation between past and future. Sleep well, dear friends. In the quiet hours of the night, while you rest, the ancient libraries continue their vigil, keeping safe the accumulated wisdom of humanity, waiting patiently for the next curious soul to discover the treasures that lie sleeping between their sacred pages. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as the eternal silence of the great libraries, where knowledge sleeps safely until the dawn of new understanding. The Memory Palace Method: How Ancients Built Libraries in Their Minds. Good evening, and welcome to a peaceful journey into the mind's most remarkable ability, the power to build entire libraries within our thoughts. Tonight, we'll explore one of humanity's oldest and most beautiful learning techniques, the Memory Palace Method. This ancient art allowed scholars, orators, and wise teachers to carry vast amounts of knowledge wherever they went, not in books or scrolls, but in carefully constructed rooms within their imagination. As you settle in for the evening, let yourself drift into this gentle exploration of how the human mind can become a sacred library, where memories rest like treasured books on invisible shelves, waiting to be discovered whenever we need them. So breathe slowly, let your body relax, and join us as we walk through the quiet halls of memory, where ancient wisdom meets the timeless architecture of the mind. Chapter 1. The Birth of Memory Palaces. Our story begins in ancient Greece, over 2,000 years ago. Picture a warm evening in Athens, where a young poet named Simonides has just finished reciting at a grand banquet. As Simonides steps outside for fresh air, the building behind him suddenly collapses. When he returns to help identify the victims, something remarkable happens. He realizes he can remember exactly where each person had been sitting by visualizing the room in his mind. This moment of tragedy becomes the birth of a beautiful technique. Simonides discovers that by connecting memories to specific places, he he can recall vast amounts of information with perfect clarity. The method is elegantly simple. You take a familiar place, perhaps your childhood home, and walk through it slowly in your imagination. Each room becomes a storage space for different memories or knowledge. Imagine walking through your front door. In the entrance hall, you might place the memory of your first day of school. Moving to the living room, you store the story of your favorite book. Each location becomes a gentle anchor for precious memories. The ancient Greeks called this technique loci, meaning places. Roman orators later perfected it, using imaginary buildings to store entire speeches. They would mentally walk through their memory palaces, collecting thoughts and ideas like flowers from a garden. What makes this method so powerful is its harmony with how our minds naturally work. We are spatial beings. We navigate through physical spaces every day. The memory palace simply uses this natural ability to organize our thoughts. Picture the great orator Cicero, preparing for an important speech. He closes his eyes and walks through his memory palace, a beautiful villa overlooking the Mediterranean. In the first room, he finds his opening argument. In the second, his main points. Each room holds exactly what he needs, arranged in perfect order. This isn't just about memorization. It's about creating a sacred space within your mind where knowledge can rest peacefully, organized and accessible whenever you need it. Chapter 2: The Monastery of the Mind. As we move through history, we find medieval monks adopting the memory palace technique for their spiritual studies. They transformed their minds into sacred monasteries where religious knowledge could be safely stored and contemplated. Brother Thomas sits quietly in his cell, preparing for tomorrow's sermon. He doesn't reach for books or scrolls. Instead, he closes his eyes and enters his memory palace, a peaceful monastery that exists only in his imagination. He begins at the chapel, where he has stored the opening prayer. Moving to the scriptorium, he finds the biblical passages he needs. In the library, his theological arguments wait patiently on invisible shelves. The monks understood something profound. Memory palaces aren't just about storing information. They're about creating contemplative spaces where knowledge can be deeply pondered and truly understood. Each monk's memory palace was unique. Some imagined grand cathedrals with soaring arches. Others preferred simple garden paths lined with peaceful groves. The architecture mattered less than the sense of sacred space it created. They would often spend hours walking through their mental monasteries, not to memorize, but to meditate, moving slowly from room to room, allowing each piece of knowledge to deepen and expand through quiet reflection. Brother Benedict's memory palace was a series of garden rooms. In the rose garden, he kept his favorite psalms. In the herb garden, his knowledge of healing plants. Each space was imbued with peace and purpose. The medieval approach teaches us that memory palaces work best when they're built with love and intention, when each room is created as a place of beauty and tranquility, where knowledge can rest like a guest in a comfortable home. Chapter 3: The Renaissance Theaters of Memory. During the Renaissance, scholars like Giulio Camillo dreamed of building physical theaters of memory, grand amphitheaters where all human knowledge could be displayed and accessed. While these physical structures were never completed, they inspired a new understanding of how our minds can become theaters of learning. Picture yourself in an elegant Renaissance theater. Velvet seats arranged in perfect rows, each one holding a different piece of knowledge. The stage below displays the main theme you're studying, while the seats around you hold supporting details and connections. Leonardo da Vinci himself used memory techniques to organize his vast knowledge. In his mental palace, he might store artistic techniques in one wing, scientific observations in another, and engineering designs in a third. The Renaissance scholars understood that memory palaces could be more than storage spaces. They could be places of creativity and discovery, where different pieces of knowledge could meet and dance together, creating new insights and understanding. Imagine walking through Leonardo's memory palace. In the artist's studio, you find techniques for mixing colors and creating perspective. In the laboratory, you discover observations about water flow and bird flight. In the workshop, you encounter designs for flying machines and mechanical marvels. But the true magic happens when you move between these rooms. Suddenly, you see connections. The way water flows informs the design of a flying machine. The principles of perspective inspire new approaches to engineering. The memory palace becomes a living laboratory of interconnected knowledge. This teaches us something beautiful about learning. Knowledge isn't meant to be stored in isolation. It flourishes when different ideas can meet and mingle. creating new possibilities and deeper understanding. The Renaissance memory theaters remind us that our minds are vast stages where knowledge can perform, play, and transform into wisdom. Chapter 4. The Scholars of Ancient China. Across the world, in ancient China, scholars developed their own approach to memory palaces. They created mental gardens where knowledge could grow like carefully tended plants, each thought finding its perfect place in the landscape of the mind. Master Li sits in his study, preparing for the imperial examinations. He doesn't frantically review scrolls. Instead, he closes his eyes and walks through his memory garden, a peaceful landscape where poetry, philosophy, and history grow in perfect harmony. In the poetry pavilion, verses by Li flutter like butterflies in the breeze. By the lotus pond, Confucian wisdom ripples outward in gentle circles. On the mountain path, historical knowledge unfolds like a scroll of painted silk. The Chinese approach emphasized flow and natural order. Rather than rigid architectural structures, they created organic spaces where knowledge could breathe and grow. Their memory palaces were living ecosystems of learning. Scholar Wang's memory palace was arranged like the seasons. Spring held new ideas and fresh insights. Summer contained fully developed theories and mature understanding. Autumn stored practical wisdom and proven techniques. Winter housed the deepest truths and most fundamental principles. This seasonal approach teaches us something profound. Knowledge, like nature, has its own rhythms and cycles. Some ideas need time to germinate. Others flourish quickly and then fade. The wisest students learn to work with these natural patterns rather than against them. The Chinese scholars also understood the importance of emptiness. They left spaces in their memory gardens for silence and reflection. These empty spaces weren't vacant. They were pregnant with possibility, ready to receive new insights and understanding. This teaches us that sometimes the most important part of learning is creating space for quiet contemplation, allowing knowledge to settle like sediment in a peaceful pond, gradually clarifying into wisdom. Chapter 5. Building Your Own Memory Palace. Now let's explore how you can create your own memory palace, a peaceful sanctuary within your mind where knowledge can rest and flourish. The beauty of this technique is its simplicity and personal nature. Begin by choosing a familiar place, your childhood home, your current living space, or perhaps a place from your dreams. The key is that it should feel comfortable and easy to navigate in your imagination. Start at the entrance and walk through slowly. Notice each room, each piece of furniture, each window and doorway. This will become the foundation of your memory palace, so take time to make it vivid and real in your mind. Now, decide what you'd like to remember. Perhaps it's a poem you love, or the names of your favorite constellations, or the steps to a recipe that brings you joy. Choose something that feels meaningful and pleasant to you. Place each piece of information in a specific location. If you're memorizing a poem, you might put the first stanza in the entrance hall, the second in the living room, and so on. The key is to create a clear, logical path through your palace. Make your memories vivid and personal. If you're storing the word ocean in your bedroom, you might imagine gentle waves lapping at the foot of your bed, or the sound of seagulls coming through your window. The more senses you engage, the stronger the memory becomes. Practice walking through your palace regularly, but don't rush. Move slowly and peacefully, allowing each memory to surface naturally. This isn't about forcing recall. It's about creating a comfortable relationship with your stored knowledge. Remember, your memory palace should feel like a sanctuary, a place where you enjoy spending time. If a particular room feels cluttered or stressful, rearrange it. If a certain path doesn't flow naturally, change it. This is your personal space for learning and growth. Some people find it helpful to add sensory details. Perhaps your memory palace has a fireplace that crackles softly, or windows that let in gentle breezes. These details don't just make the space more vivid, they make it more peaceful and inviting. The most important thing is to be patient with yourself. Building a memory palace is like tending a garden. It takes time, gentle care, and regular attention. But the rewards are profound. A mind that feels organized, peaceful, and ready for learning. Chapter 6. The Modern Memory Palace. In our modern world, the memory palace technique continues to evolve. Contemporary memory champions use these ancient methods to memorize entire books, long sequences of numbers, and complex technical information. But perhaps more importantly, everyday people are discovering how memory palaces can bring peace and organization to their busy lives. Sarah, a busy professional, uses her memory palace to store her daily intentions. In her mental living room, she keeps her priorities for the day. In her kitchen, she stores reminders about healthy habits. In her bedroom, she places her evening gratitude practice. This modern approach isn't about memorizing vast amounts of information. It's about creating mental spaces that support well-being and mindful living. The memory palace becomes a tool for presence rather than just storage. Medical students use memory palaces to learn anatomy. But instead of sterile facts, they create vivid, story-rich journeys through the human body. The heart becomes a bustling city center. The lungs become peaceful forests. Learning becomes an adventure rather than a chore. Language learners create memory palaces in their target language. Walking through a French cafe in their imagination, they encounter vocabulary words as friendly characters. Each conversation builds their confidence and deepens their connection to the new language. The modern memory palace teaches us that this ancient technique isn't just about having a good memory. It's about creating meaningful relationships with knowledge, making learning joyful rather than stressful, and finding peace in the process of discovery. Artists use memory palaces to store inspiration. Musicians create mental concert halls where melodies and rhythms wait to be discovered. Writers build imaginary libraries where characters and stories live between projects. The key insight of modern memory palace practice is this: when we create beautiful, peaceful spaces in our minds, learning becomes not just easier, but more joyful. We begin to see our minds not as storage units to be filled, but as gardens to be tended with love and attention. And so our journey through the memory palaces of the mind comes to a peaceful close. We've walked together through ancient Greek villas, medieval monasteries, Renaissance theaters, Chinese gardens, and modern sanctuaries of learning. What connects all these approaches is a simple but profound truth. The human mind is not just a storage device, but a sacred space capable of holding infinite beauty, wisdom, and wonder. When we treat our minds with reverence and care, they become palaces worthy of the knowledge we place within them. As you prepare for sleep tonight, perhaps you'll begin to imagine your own memory palace. Not as a project to be completed, but as a garden to be slowly, lovingly cultivated. A place where your most precious memories and knowledge can rest in peace and beauty. You might place tonight's insights in a special room of your palace. Perhaps a comfortable library with soft chairs and warm lighting, where the wisdom of the ancients mingles with your own growing understanding. Remember, the most important memory palace is not built of stone or wood, but of attention and intention. It's the space you create when you approach learning with patience, curiosity, and love. Sleep peacefully, knowing that within your mind lies the potential for infinite palaces of wisdom, each one waiting to be discovered, each one ready to hold the treasures of human knowledge and experience. Sweet dreams, dear learners. May your rest be filled with beautiful spaces where knowledge and wisdom dance together in perfect harmony. The Memory Palace Method: how ancients built libraries in their minds. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's journey into the mind. I'm here to share with you one of humanity's most beautiful mental techniques. A method so powerful, it allowed ancient scholars to carry entire libraries within their thoughts. Tonight, we explore the Memory Palace Method, also known as the Method of Loci, a technique that transforms your mind into a vast, organized space, where every piece of knowledge has its perfect place. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, let your breathing slow and deepen. We're about to discover how ancient minds built magnificent libraries that existed only in thought, yet held more wisdom than stone and mortar ever could. Historical foundations. Our story begins over 2,000 years ago, in ancient Greece, where a poet named Simonides discovered something remarkable about the human mind. The year was 556 BCE. Simonides was at a banquet, a grand celebration with many guests. He was called outside for a moment. When he returned, disaster had struck. The roof had collapsed, trapping everyone inside. But here's where the magic happened. Simonides could identify each victim, not by their faces, which were impossible to recognize, but by where they had been sitting. He remembered exactly where each person had been placed around the room. In that moment of tragedy, Simonides realized something profound. Our minds naturally link memories to places. We remember not just what happened, but where it happened. This became the foundation, the bedrock of the Memory Palace Method. If our minds naturally connect memories to locations, why not use this power intentionally? The Romans embraced this technique. They called it the method of loci. Loci means places in Latin. Roman orators used it to remember long speeches, without notes, without prompts. just the power of imagined space. Cicero, the great Roman speaker, could deliver hours-long speeches. Every argument perfectly ordered, every example in its place, because in his mind he walked through rooms. Each room held different parts of his speech. Medieval scholars continued this tradition. In monasteries across Europe, monks built elaborate mental cathedrals, each filled with prayers, scriptures, and sacred knowledge. Understanding the method. So what exactly is a memory palace? Think of it as a familiar building in your mind. This could be your childhood home, your current apartment, your school, or even an imaginary castle. The key is familiarity. You must know this place intimately. Every room, every hallway, every corner. This becomes your foundation, your mental framework for storing information. Let's imagine together. Picture your childhood home. Start at the front door. Can you see it clearly? The color, the handle, the welcome mat beneath your feet. Now step inside. What do you see first? Perhaps a hallway, maybe a living room. Notice the details, the furniture, the lighting, the way the space feels around you. This is your palace, your mental library, and we're about to fill it with knowledge. The beauty of this method lies in our brain's natural architecture. We have separate systems for spatial memory and factual memory. The memory palace method connects these systems, creating stronger, more durable memories. When you place information in a specific location, you're not just remembering facts. You're remembering a journey, and journeys are stories. Stories are what our minds were designed to remember. Ancient peoples understood this intuitively. Before writing was common, everything important lived in memory. Genealogies, laws, stories, sacred teachings. The memory palace wasn't just helpful. It was essential for preserving culture itself. Building your first palace. Let's build your first memory palace together. Start by choosing your location. This should be somewhere you know well, somewhere that brings you peace. For our practice tonight, let's use a simple apartment. We'll start at the front door. This is always your beginning point, your anchor. Every journey through your palace starts here. Step through the door. What's immediately to your left? Perhaps a coat closet. This will be our first station, our first location for storing information. Continue forward into the living room. Notice the sofa, the coffee table, the television. Each piece of furniture becomes a potential storage point, a place where memories can live. The key is to always move in the same direction. Always follow the same path. This creates consistency, reliability. Your mental journey becomes as natural as breathing. From the living room, where do you go next? Perhaps the kitchen. Notice the refrigerator, the stove, the dining table. Each location offers space for new memories. Now let's practice with simple information. Imagine you want to remember a grocery list. Milk, bread, apples, cheese. For simple items, at your coat closet, picture a cow. A friendly, gentle cow hanging up her coat. This represents milk. The image is unusual, memorable. It sticks in your mind. Move to your sofa. Here sits a loaf of bread, but not ordinary bread. This bread is reading a newspaper, relaxing after a long day. This represents bread on your list. Continue to your coffee table. Here you find apples, but these apples are having a tea party. Tiny cups and saucers. The apples are chatting quietly about their day. Finally, at your refrigerator, you meet a piece of cheese. This cheese is cooling off after a workout, wiping sweat with a tiny towel, looking refreshed and happy. Now, let's take the journey again. Start at your front door. Walk to the coat closet. What do you see? The cow hanging up her coat. Milk. Continue to the sofa. The bread reading his newspaper. Bread for your list. The coffee table holds the apple tea party. Apples for your shopping. And the refrigerator has the cheese cooling down. Cheese to complete your list. This is the power of the memory palace. You've connected abstract information to concrete locations. You've created a story, a journey, something your mind can easily retrace. Advanced techniques. As you become comfortable with basic palaces, you can expand your mental architecture. Create multiple buildings, entire cities of memory. Ancient scholars often had dozens of palaces. One for mathematics, another for literature, a third for philosophy. Each subject lived in its own carefully designed space. The key to advanced memory palaces is organization. Create themes. Group related information together. Let similar concepts share neighborhoods in your mental city. For studying languages, you might build a foreign marketplace. Each stall represents different vocabulary categories. The fruit vendor teaches food words. The clothing merchant offers terms for garments. For historical dates, consider a timeline palace. A long hallway where each door represents a different century. Behind each door, rooms for decades. In each room, events positioned by year. The beauty of this system is its flexibility. Your palaces can be realistic or fantastical. A childhood home or an alien spaceship. A forest path or an underwater cave. The only requirement is that you can navigate them easily. Medieval monks created the most elaborate palaces. Some built entire mental cathedrals. The entrance held prayers for morning. The nave contained scripture verses. The altar housed the most sacred teachings. These weren't just memory tools. They were spiritual practices. Each mental journey became a form of meditation, a way to connect with divine knowledge through sacred space. Modern practitioners continue this tradition. Medical students build hospital palaces. Each room represents a different body system. Lawyers construct courthouse palaces with different wings for various legal principles. The possibilities are endless. Your mind is vast. It can hold libraries larger than any physical building, archives more complete than any earthly collection. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what ancient scholars knew intuitively. Our brains are naturally designed for spatial memory. We have specific brain regions dedicated to navigation. The hippocampus creates mental maps of our environment. These same regions activate when we use memory palaces. This explains why the method works so powerfully. We're not fighting against our brain's design. We're working with it, using millions of years of evolutionary programming to our advantage. Studies show that memory palace practitioners can remember up to 90% more information than those using traditional study methods. The improvement isn't small. It's dramatic, transformative, but the benefits go beyond mere memorization. Regular use of memory palaces strengthens spatial reasoning, improves creativity, enhances overall cognitive function. The method also engages multiple senses. You see your palace. You move through it. You interact with the objects within. This multisensory approach creates richer, more durable memories. Ancient practitioners understood this intuitively. They filled their palaces with vivid, engaging imagery. The more unusual or emotional the image, the better it stuck in memory. This is why our grocery list worked so well. A cow hanging up her coat is memorable because it's unexpected. Apples having a tea party engages our emotions. These aren't just facts. They're experiences. As we reach the end of our journey tonight, take a moment to appreciate what you've learned. You now possess one of humanity's oldest and most powerful mental tools. The Memory Palace method isn't just about remembering facts. It's about transforming your relationship with knowledge. Instead of struggling to cram information into why ancient books were chained, the art of protecting knowledge. Welcome, dear viewers, to another peaceful journey through history. Tonight, we'll explore a fascinating chapter from the past, the story of chained books. Find a comfortable position, take a deep breath, and let's discover together why our ancestors literally chained their most precious books to library shelves. Close your eyes if you'd like, and imagine walking into a medieval library. The air smells of old parchment and leather. Sunlight filters through stained glass windows. And there, on wooden reading desks, you notice something unusual. The books, they're all attached to chains. This isn't a prison for books. This is love. This is protection. This is the story of how knowledge was so precious that people literally chained it down to keep it safe. Let's begin our gentle exploration. In medieval times, books were incredibly rare and valuable. Each one was copied by hand, letter by letter, page by page. A single book could take months or even years to complete. Imagine the dedication, the careful attention. The monk bent over his desk, slowly forming each letter with perfect precision. These books weren't just expensive. They were irreplaceable treasures. If a book was lost or stolen, that knowledge might disappear forever. There were no printing presses yet. No way to quickly make copies. Each book was unique, precious, and absolutely vital to preserve. The practice of chaining books began in the Middle Ages and continued for several centuries. Libraries and monasteries, universities, and cathedrals all used this system. The chains weren't meant to be cruel or restrictive. They were meant to be protective, caring, ensuring that knowledge would always be there for the next person who needed it. Picture the chain itself. Usually made of iron, it was attached to the book's binding, often to a metal plate or ring on the front or back cover. the other end connected to a horizontal rod or bar that ran along the bookshelf. The chain was long enough to allow the book to be opened and read comfortably, but not long enough to be carried away. These chained libraries had a special atmosphere: quiet, reverent, sacred. Scholars would sit at wooden reading desks, carefully turning pages, absorbing wisdom that had been preserved for generations. The gentle sound of pages turning, the soft scratch of a quill taking notes, the whispered discussions between students and teachers. The books themselves were works of art, hand-illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf and vibrant colors, elaborate decorations in the margins, beautiful calligraphy that was as much art as it was writing. Each page was a masterpiece, created with love and devotion by skilled craftspeople. Different libraries had different systems for their chains. Some used a rod system, where chains hung from horizontal bars. Others used rings attached to the desks themselves. The chains were carefully measured, not too short to prevent comfortable reading, not too long to allow theft. It was a delicate balance between access and security. Consider the types of books that were chained. Religious texts, of course, Bibles, prayer books, theological treatises, but also scientific works, philosophical texts, medical manuals, and legal documents. Any book that contained important knowledge was considered worth protecting with a chain. The people who used these chained libraries treated them with enormous respect. Students understood the privilege of accessing such rare knowledge. Scholars traveled great distances just to read a particular chained book. The very act of approaching a chained book was done with reverence and gratitude. Library rules were strict but sensible. Books must be handled gently, pages turned carefully. No food or drink near the manuscripts. Silence was often required. These weren't harsh restrictions. They were loving guidelines to protect irreplaceable treasures for future generations. Some of the most famous chained libraries still exist today. The Francis Trigg Chained Library in England, established in the 1500s. The Hereford Cathedral Chained Library, with its medieval books still chained to their original shelves. These surviving libraries let us step back in time and experience how our ancestors protected their most precious knowledge. Walking through these ancient libraries today feels almost magical. You can sense the centuries of learning that took place within those walls. The countless students who sat at those same desks. The scholars who carefully turned those same pages. The knowledge that was preserved, protected, and passed down through the chains of time. The end of chained libraries came gradually. As printing presses became more common, books became less rare and expensive. Multiple copies could be made quickly and affordably. The need to chain every single book slowly disappeared. Knowledge became more accessible, more democratic, more widely shared. But something beautiful was lost too. The reverence for books. The understanding of how precious knowledge really is. The careful, thoughtful approach to learning. In our digital age, we have access to more information than any medieval scholar could have imagined. But perhaps we've lost some of the wonder and respect that came with scarcity. Think about the dedication of those medieval librarians. They understood their role as guardians of knowledge. They weren't just organizing books, they were protecting human civilization itself. Every chain they attached was an act of love for future generations. The craftspeople who made these chains also played a vital role. Blacksmiths who understood they weren't just making metal links, they were creating the guardians of wisdom. Each chain was custom-made, carefully fitted, thoughtfully designed to protect while still allowing access. Consider the trust involved in the chained library system. Readers were trusted to handle irreplaceable books carefully. Librarians trusted that the chains would be sufficient protection. Society trusted that knowledge would be preserved for everyone's benefit. This was a community effort to protect what mattered most. The chained book system also reveals something beautiful about human nature. When something is truly precious, we go to great lengths to protect it. Not to hoard it or hide it, but to ensure it remains available for those who need it. The chains weren't barriers. They were bridges connecting past wisdom to future learning. Some chained libraries had librarians who lived on site, dedicated guardians who made the protection of books their life's work. They would wake each morning in service to knowledge itself. They would walk through their libraries like shepherds tending their flocks, checking each chain, caring for each book, ensuring that wisdom would survive another day. The daily routines of these libraries were meditative and peaceful. Opening the library at dawn, checking that each book was secure and undamaged. Helping scholars find the texts they needed. Carefully closing and securing everything at nightfall. a rhythm of care and protection that continued day after day, year after year, century after century. Many chained books contain marginalia, notes written by readers in the margins. These annotations create a conversation across centuries. A scholar in the 1300s might write a question. A reader in the 1500s might provide an answer. The chains didn't just protect the original text. They protected this ongoing dialogue between minds across time. Reading these marginalia today is like eavesdropping on conversations between brilliant people who lived hundreds of years apart. Their thoughts, questions, insights, and discoveries are preserved forever, protected by those careful chains. Knowledge building upon knowledge, wisdom growing through the centuries. The aesthetic of chained libraries was deliberately calming and contemplative. Soft lighting from windows and candles, warm wood tones, the quiet sound of chains gently moving as books were opened and closed. Everything was designed to create an atmosphere of peaceful learning and reflection. These libraries understood something we sometimes forget, that the environment affects how we learn. Beautiful surroundings inspire beautiful thoughts. Peaceful spaces promote peaceful minds. Reverent atmospheres encourage reverent approaches to knowledge. The practice of chaining books spread across Europe and beyond. Each culture adapted the system to their own needs and traditions. Some used elaborate decorative chains. Others preferred simple, functional designs. But the underlying principle remained the same. Protect what is precious so it can be shared. Consider the social aspect of chained libraries. They were gathering places for learned people. Spaces where ideas could be exchanged safely. Where scholars could meet, discuss, and debate while surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of ages. The chains created stability that allowed for dynamic intellectual growth. As we near the end of our journey through the world of chained books, let's reflect on what we can learn from our ancestors. They understood that knowledge is precious, that wisdom must be protected, that access to information is a privilege and a responsibility. They also understood that protection doesn't mean restriction. The chains allowed books to be read, studied, and learned from. They just ensured that the books would be there for the next person, and the next, and the next. It was protection in service of sharing, not hoarding. In our modern world, we face different challenges in protecting knowledge. Digital preservation, online security, ensuring access while preventing abuse. The methods have changed, but the underlying mission remains the same: to protect and share the wisdom of humanity. Perhaps we can learn from those medieval librarians. Their patience, their dedication, their understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. They were links in a chain of knowledge that stretches from the past to the future, with ourselves as the current guardians. Think about the patience these librarians cultivated. Day after day, they would tend to their collections with the same careful attention, never rushing, never cutting corners. They understood that haste could damage what had taken years to create. Their patience wasn't just a virtue. It was a form of love expressed through time and attention. This patience extended to how they taught others. When a young scholar approached a chained book for the first time, the librarian would gently explain how to handle it, how to support the binding, how to turn pages without stress, how to read without damaging. These weren't just rules, they were rituals of respect passed down through generations. Their dedication went beyond duty. These weren't people simply doing a job. They were individuals who had chosen to dedicate their lives to something eternal. They understood that books would outlive them, that the knowledge they protected would benefit people they would never meet. Their work was an act of faith in the future of human learning. Consider what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. These librarians didn't own the books they protected. They didn't create the knowledge they guarded. They were custodians, temporary guardians of humanity's collective wisdom. They held their position in trust, knowing that others had come before them and others would come after. This perspective brought a profound humility to their work. They weren't the heroes of the story. They were the quiet servants who made heroism possible. The scholars who made great discoveries, the students who went on to change the world. All of this was possible because someone somewhere had carefully maintained the books that contained the necessary knowledge. The chain metaphor becomes even more powerful when we think about it this way. Each librarian was a link connecting the wisdom of the past to the needs of the future. Like the metal chains that held the books, human chains of dedication held civilization together. Knowledge passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, mind to mind. We are indeed the current guardians, though our tools and methods have changed. Where medieval librarians used iron chains, we use digital backups and cloud storage. Where they used candlelight and careful handling, we use climate control and preservation technology. But the essential mission remains unchanged: to protect knowledge and make it accessible to those who need it. Modern librarians carry forward this ancient tradition in new ways. They digitize fragile manuscripts so they can be studied without damage. They create online databases that make rare books accessible to scholars worldwide. They teach information literacy in an age of overwhelming data. The chains may be invisible now, but the protection continues. Teachers, too, are part of this chain. Every educator who shares knowledge with care and patience follows in the footsteps of those medieval guardians. They understand that they're not just transmitting information, they're preserving and extending human understanding. Each lesson taught is a link added to the endless chain of learning. Even parents reading bedtime stories to their children are part of this ancient tradition. They're passing down not just individual stories, but the love of books themselves, the reverence for knowledge, the understanding that learning is precious and worth protecting. The chain continues in living rooms and nurseries around the world. Writers and researchers add new links to the chain by creating knowledge rather than just preserving it. But they build upon the foundation laid by countless generations before them. The medieval texts they reference, the historical sources they consult, the accumulated wisdom they draw upon, all of this exists because someone long ago decided it was worth chaining to a shelf for safekeeping. Students, perhaps, are the most important links in the chain. They transform preserved knowledge into living wisdom. They take what has been protected and make it active in the world. Every student who approaches learning with respect and curiosity honors the memory of those medieval scholars who sat at chained books, absorbing wisdom with grateful hearts. The responsibility we inherit is both simple and profound. We must continue to protect what is valuable. We must ensure that knowledge remains accessible to future generations. We must approach learning with the same reverence and care that our ancestors showed when they literally chained their most precious books. This doesn't mean we need to be solemn or overly serious about knowledge. The medieval librarians found joy in their work. They celebrated discoveries. They delighted in helping scholars find exactly what they needed. Protection and joy can coexist. Preservation and celebration go hand in hand. Think about the trust placed in us by previous generations. They preserved knowledge through wars and plagues, through social upheavals and natural disasters. They maintained libraries when it would have been easier to let them fade away. They copied texts by hand when their eyes grew tired and their fingers ached, also that we might have access to the wisdom they valued. This trust creates both privilege and responsibility. We have access to more knowledge than any previous generation in human history. We can read texts that medieval scholars would have traveled months to see. We can access multiple copies of books that once existed in only single chained versions. With this incredible access comes the obligation to use it wisely and to ensure its continuation. The chain of knowledge is only as strong as its weakest link. Each generation must do its part to maintain the connection between past and future. We cannot assume that others will handle this responsibility for us. We cannot take for granted that knowledge will automatically survive and thrive. It requires conscious effort, deliberate care, and ongoing dedication. Yet this responsibility is also a gift. To be part of something so much larger than ourselves. To contribute to the great human project of learning and understanding. To know that our small efforts join with countless others to preserve and extend the reach of human knowledge. There is profound meaning in this quiet, essential work. The next time you open a book, think of those chained libraries. Remember the monks who copied each letter by hand, the librarians who protected each volume with care, the scholars who traveled great distances to read a single precious text, the craftspeople who forged chains not as barriers, but as guardians. Feel the weight of all that dedication, the love for knowledge that motivated generations of people to protect and preserve wisdom for us. We are the beneficiaries of their care, the recipients of their gift. We hold in our hands the legacy of their protection. And so our peaceful journey through the world of chained books comes to a gentle close. We've walked through medieval libraries. We've met the dedicated guardians of knowledge. We've seen how love can take the form of iron chains and wooden shelves. As you prepare for sleep tonight, carry with you the image of those quiet libraries, the soft sound of pages turning, the warm glow of candlelight on ancient wisdom, the peaceful dedication of people who understood that knowledge is one of humanity's greatest treasures. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the world, books are still being protected, knowledge is still being preserved, wisdom is still being passed from one generation to the next. The chain continues, and you are part of it. Sweet dreams, dear viewers. May your rest be peaceful, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom of ages past. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful exploration of chained books. Rest well, and remember, knowledge is a treasure worth protecting, worth sharing, and worth celebrating.